and it's my great pleasure today to welcome with us in studio and with a live audience, Kristi Noem and Matt Verlick. Folks, welcome and thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us for a very important part of sort of communicating with the public and educating them about the vital issues in this all-important race. Joining me for our Q&A today are on my right, Mary Carol Keeter, the executive editor. On my left, Corey Myers, the digital media manager. So we're just going to briefly follow this format. We're going to begin with the candidate, give them a question, give them about a minute and a half to respond. We will then go to the other candidate, give them I think 30 seconds to respond. Then we'll go back to, did I say that wrong? Okay, there's a minute and a half. Then we'll go back to the original for a rejoinder if possible, and that's 30 seconds. Very complicated. I'll see if I can't remember that. We're going to start, Kristi, with you.
Sure.
First question. I believe this is correct, that we are destined to end 2012 with a deficit of $1.1 trillion, roughly, rounded up. The fourth year in a row that we've beat $1 trillion in deficit. What have you personally done as a member of Congress to lower that deficit?
You know, that's been one of the biggest challenges that we're facing, certainly as a country, but it's impacting all of our families and kids here in South Dakota, too. So as a House, we have voted to cut over $6 trillion the last 2 years. And that was targeted spending cuts rather than across-the-board cuts, recognizing that everything needs to be prioritized, and we need to look at what's important and put that at the top of the list to protect, but beyond that, that we need to tighten our belts. What actually got enacted was about $2.2 trillion worth of cuts, and it's the first time that 2 years in a row that we've reduced spending since World War II. So we've made progress. It just hasn't been enough, and enough that we really need to make sure that we put this country back on the right track. We started down this path when I was first elected and got to Washington by cutting our own budgets. The first year we cut our own budgets that we operate in as members of the House by 5%, and then this year we cut it again by 6%, thinking that you can't ask anybody to tighten their belt if you're not willing to do it yourself. And so that's what we did as members of Congress, and then beyond that, continuing to work through bills and priorities and making sure that the reductions were done in a thoughtful manner and that they were recognizing what's important about America and trying to preserve that in its priorities.
Thank you. Matt?
And I wanted to first begin by thanking the Argus Leader for having this forum and thanking everyone who's listening, and also thanking my opponent for being here. And I have to admit that I've been disappointed this summer because we haven't had very many opportunities to debate these issues. Because
the question is somewhat different for you, so I hope you'll tackle that deficit question.
Sure, but first just to mention, you know, you've turned down a lot of opportunities for South Dakotans to get information on this deficit question and many others. I've heard so many Clint Eastwood jokes this summer because I've taken a lot of opportunities where it's been only an empty chair with me on the stage.
Right, but let's talk about the deficit here.
And that's one of the top issues that we receive when I take these opportunities, and we have a very distinct difference on how we would approach this issue. My opponent believes in a cuts-only approach to the deficit and has voted for budgets that would give new tax breaks to folks at the very top of the economic ladder. Now that makes it all the harder to shrink the deficit. She's taken a pledge to a guy named Grover Norquist, who's not a South Dakotan, to say that under no circumstances would she make any changes to the tax code that would increase revenue, even if your name's Donald Trump or Paris Hilton or Warren Buffett. I believe in a balanced approach. I believe we should cut spending, for example, ending direct payments in the Farm Bill, for example, but also look at the revenue side of the equation. If you're serious about the deficit, we can't afford to renew the Bush tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires, and if we don't renew those tax cuts, then we don't have to do dramatic and extreme things like privatize Medicare, for example, something that my opponent has voted to do. So she wants to do cuts only and protect millionaires. I want to take a balanced approach and protect South Dakota seniors.
Kristi.
Yeah. Well, I'm thankful that we still have 3 debates left, so we'll get the chance to continue to debate. So we'll have plenty of opportunities to do that. But, you know, when we passed our House budget, we didn't just talk about our priorities and where spending should go and where we need to tighten our belt, but we also did tax reform. So I know Matt was talking a little bit specifically about our tax code. And we really do need to focus on reforms. We did that in our budget. We condensed the 6 levels down to 2, and we also closed loopholes and exemptions. Our tax code has picked winners and losers over the year, and our government needs to stop doing that and close those loopholes so that everybody is paying their fair share.
Thank you. Matt, we're going to go to you for the next question, and I'm going to jump in here and do the second one, then open up for my colleagues. Because it's already come up in this discussion, I'll raise this question. I think I speak for virtually every South Dakotan when I say I'm tired of people screaming at each other at Washington. And because that tone has already literally crept into this very brief discussion, I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do if you're elected to end that tone that South Dakotans are weary of?
And I want to be clear that I think we can have disagreements about very serious issues like Medicare and the deficit and do it in a civil way, and that's certainly my intention here and in every opportunity. You're absolutely right that right now in Washington there aren't enough people who are willing to work together, stay at the table long enough to seek out some common ground and find a way to move forward on issues. And we see that lack of willingness to work together in a whole host of issues that haven't been done by the U.S. House. So we see postal reform that hasn't been voted on. We see the production tax credit for wind energy that hasn't been extended. We see the Farm Bill, which I hope we'll get to talk about, which not only hasn't been reauthorized for 5 years, it's going to be allowed to expire in just a few short days here. What we need to have is members who bring a constructive attitude to the job where they say we're willing to work with folks from across the political aisle and try to find those common sense solutions. But right now, in the U.S. House in particular, it's dominated by the Tea Party. The Tea Party does not even give lip service to the idea of compromise. Very often they say my way or the highway. That's why we've seen multiple threats to shut down the government over the debt ceiling issue. That's why we have a farm bill that didn't even get a vote. And my opponent rode the Tea Party wave into office in 2010 and then was elected by the freshman class of 87 members, mainly who are Tea Partiers, to represent their interests in the House leadership. And I think she should take some responsibility for the fact that this House has been the least productive that we can remember. Traditionally, South Dakota has had aggressive members of Congress, but who are willing to work with folks on both sides of the aisle, form friendships, and focus on progress. And that's the kind of member that I'll be.
Christy?
Well, you know, I always take responsibility for my actions. And when I was first elected to represent South Dakota, I decided that when I went there and brought bills forward, that I would do all I could to make sure that when I proposed them, that I had a Democratic co-sponsor with me. So I have the majority of my bills that were able to do that. And then beyond that, the proposals that I worked on to come forward that were specifically in relation to the Farm Bill also passed with wide bipartisan support. The farm dust bill that I carried, I had a couple of Democratic co-sponsors with. I brought forward an impact aid bill that was important for our schools and our rural educators here in this state that I had Democratic co-sponsorship with. Worked very closely on the Farm Bill with Representative Welch to make sure that we pushed that and got that forward and trying to get support for that. You know, the Farm Bill's always been a bipartisan bill. We've always had to have Republicans and Democrats come together to get the job done. And I've been highly critical of the Democrats that have walked away from the bill this time because of reforms to the nutrition side. But I've been highly critical of my Republican leadership, too, and fought them because of their unwillingness to bring it to the floor for a vote when they didn't think it would pass. So, you know, we all stand on our own 2 feet and take responsibility for our actions. And I'm proud of the fact that I made it a priority to work with my Democratic colleagues, even though I was a Republican, and that we found issues we could agree on and furthered them, and that when it came to National Labor Relations Board activities on tribal ground, that we worked on it together to get it done and to make sure that we could do what was right for the people in South Dakota and across the country. I think that's critically important. There is enough bickering and enough fighting. The only way we're going to have progress is to find where we can agree on issues and do it together.
Thank you, Matt.
You know, unfortunately, I think the results speak for themselves. And we haven't seen a farm bill get passed. We haven't seen it brought for a vote because whatever efforts you've made have not been successful. You have blamed the president. You have blamed the minority party in the House for supposedly opposing the farm bill, even though I think there's an indication that plenty of Democrats would support it. But what you haven't been able to do is deliver any support from the Tea Party caucus that you represent, or the freshman class. Since the discharge petition came out, no additional members whom you represent have signed on to it, and those results speak for themselves.
I'm going to change the subject here to Medicare. Representative Noem, starting with you.
Sure.
You have supported the Medicare voucher program that was outlined by Paul Ryan, and I guess my question is, why do you prefer that strategy?
Well, Medicare is going broke. So the Medicare Trustees, which are a bipartisan group of people, some of them appointed by the president and the president's own people, have said that we have essentially 12 years to really fix the program, or it'll cease to exist like we see it today. And so we have to take action. And I've always been a person that sees challenges and thinks that it's not good just to poke somebody in the eye for the challenge and the problem that we've got, but to offer a solution. And so the plan that I supported, I think, is a good one. It leaves everything the same for anybody who's 55 and older. So anybody who's depending on the program, and for all of our seniors, nothing changes. And it gives two options for everybody else who's younger than that. They can stay on traditional Medicare if they like the way that it works today, or they can choose a plan and a policy that works better for them, and then the government will subsidize that policy. So it makes the choice between that person and what their health care option might be, rather than putting the government in between that decision-making person. The other thing I like about the plan is it's voluntary. Nobody has to change anything if they don't want to. And it subsidizes the wealthy less, and it helps those who are sicker more. And those are things that I hear from South Dakotans every single day that they want. They want some of that common sense. We want subsidies for wealthy people less. We don't think that government dollars should be flowing to them. And then we recognize that people who are sicker need more help, that they need more help, and that's the way that we should do it through our Medicare programs. So that solution is a solution that I think South Dakotans really do support, because they recognize if they like traditional Medicare, they can stay on it regardless of what age that they are.
Matt, a little bit different question for you. You have outlined your own strategies. I've seen the paper you've produced on dealing with Medicare. Can you explain what your strategies are and how that is better than the Paul Ryan?
Right, and I think it's notable that in defending the privatization plan that my opponent has voted for, she says it won't change anything for a certain class of people. That tells you, I think we're very aware that it's not a good plan, and we don't want to foist it on too many people. If it were a great plan that we could be proud of defending, you'd be bragging about the changes that it does make for people. I have said it is true that Medicare is facing serious challenges, and we need to face up to those. But my opponent tells us that we have only two choices: let it go bankrupt or privatize the program and cost South Dakota seniors potentially as much as $6,400 extra dollars out of pocket. Well, I say there's a third option, and that is to preserve and strengthen traditional Medicare that has worked so well for so many South Dakotans over the years. And so I put out a position paper outlining some concrete ideas, because I think it's important that in this campaign we say where we stand and defend those ideas. And so I think we should do things like giving Medicare the power to negotiate prescription drug prices, just like the VA has. We should speed up the pace at which generic drugs come to market. We should start to move in a direction where we pay for results as opposed to just paying for every individual test and procedure. If we do that, we don't have to privatize the program. We don't have to charge South Dakotans extra $6,400 out of pocket. We can preserve that program that we know so well. Now, my opponent also said that she takes responsibility for all of her actions. She's now sending out an attack postcard with my name on it here, saying that I want to harm Medicare. I just mentioned what my plan is for Medicare to strengthen and preserve it. This item I'm going to give back to you. We don't want it. But it claims that I want to cut billions of dollars out of Medicare. That particular claim is a remarkable one that President Clinton mentioned, because you have also voted twice in favor of the same savings. So it's one thing to oppose something and then be for it, but it's another thing to support it and attack me over it at the same time. So we should take accountability for our actions.
Absolutely, and I'll clarify what Matt was talking about. The $6,400 that he talks about increased cost came from the Congressional Budget Office. And the Congressional Budget Office has come back since then and said that those numbers are not ones that they can recreate or generate at this time, that they're simply not numbers that they can back up. So we know that that's a false number, and it doesn't reflect the plan that I've supported in this budget that really would save Medicare going into the future. This piece and what you were talking about as far as billions of dollars of cuts that would come from Medicare are in the health care plan that the president passed that Matt does support and has said that he supported. It essentially cuts $716 billion out of Medicare to fund Obamacare. And that is specifically where that's diverted. Now, the dollars and savings that are reflected in our Medicare plan are plugged right back into Medicare. They're not diverted to fund a new entitlement program. They're put right back in to strengthen Medicare, and that's the key difference. We're not using it to create a whole new entitlement program, which is what Obamacare does that you support. Ours is used to strengthen Medicare.
If I could just follow up, you say in your attack piece that you'll also restore those
No,
dollars.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
Whose question is it, Matt?
It's Matt. Well,
What,
yeah, it
this
is.
is
I
the
think I did
problem with the
Medicare one.
discussion on Medicare. I mean, I think that there are so many numbers thrown around and so much,
Rhetoric.
this isn't going to affect you, but it's going to affect, my question to you, Matt, is what is the best way for South Dakota seniors to figure out what they really can believe on? These are very different plans. You have outlined one, and Ryan's is, of course, a different version. What do you recommend for the seniors to figure out what is the best plan, or the soon-to-be seniors, that I can support?
It is very complicated, and it's a difficult question, and it's an important question, and that's why a forum like this one is great, because we get to have this debate, and that's how we make decisions. Unfortunately, we're trying to have the debate through attack mail that's going to seniors and misleading them. It's clear from fact-check organizations and many others that this claim about wanting to harm Medicare through the health reform law is false. You have voted for the same savings, but also in that same document you say that you're going to restore those savings. And so you're trying to have it both ways. The $6,400 figure, that's how much it would cost the average participant in the future, is based on the 2011 version that you voted for. Now, you've also voted for a different variation, and that's where they say they can't recreate the numbers because the plan doesn't have enough detail to it. But that doesn't erase anything about the fact that in 2011, you voted for a plan that would cost South Dakota seniors an extra $6,400 out of pocket. I oppose that plan because I'm on the side of seniors. You're on the side of giving more tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. But to afford those tax breaks, you have to do radical things like privatizing Medicare, which is a bad idea.
Christy, what do you tell? Where should seniors in South Dakota go to be able to assess both of these different options and any other options that are out there for Medicare?
Well, I'm not sure of the option that Matt has proposed, if it's been scored, or the costs and what the impact to seniors necessarily would be. They can know for sure that the plan that was put forward in our budget, it has been scored. The Congressional Budget Office does put out numbers that they can refer to and that they can find online. But specifically, what they need to know is that nothing changes for seniors. There's been no plan put forward that I've supported that does anything to them. So seniors can know that with the plan that I have voted for and supported ever since I've been in Congress, changes nothing for anyone 55 and older. And I think that's key, because when you have people that have paid into a program and are counting on it, and now are in those later years of their life and hope that it's going to be there, that we give them the certainty that they need, that that program will continue to stay intact. So, they can find on our website certainly that, but if they're looking for a nonpartisan, unbiased place that they can go, the Medicare Trustees give good information out on where the program is at, what its future looks like, and then look at analysis that's done by organizations such as Politifact or the CBO to see where the numbers really lie.
Yeah, well,
Do I get a rebuttal on that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yep, you
All right,
do.
yeah.
The idea that the plan she supports is voluntary and also doesn't change anything. Once again, if it doesn't change anything, it's hard to understand why that's something that you would brag about. The fact is that the plan you support would close, or rather would reopen the prescription drug donut hole. It would siphon some participants out of traditional Medicare, which would raise premiums on folks who are still in Medicare. And the original plan you voted for was not voluntary. It forced people into a plan where they would have to get private insurance. They would get a voucher to cover part of the cost, but their health care decisions would be in the hands of private insurance companies instead of Medicare. And that's clearly not good for South Dakota seniors, and it's clearly why I'm opposed to that plan.
Okay, sorry, Corey, go.
no, that's fine. At the risk or maybe benefit of getting away from the healthcare discussion here, we're going to move on to another question from a reader dealing with wind energy tax credits. And this reader believes would help South Dakota farmers and manufacturers in the state, and wondering, this person's opinion is why the Republican Party seems to be against these tax credits. And I think we're starting with Representative Nome.
Republicans have been wanting to do tax reform, recognizing that our tax code picks winners and losers, and that we really do need to have comprehensive tax reform going forward. And so as we've had this discussion, we see that a lot of these tax credits are expiring at the end of the year. The PTC is wrapped up into some of those, and that's why months ago I circulated a letter and got other freshman colleagues of mine to sign on to our leadership team that said, listen, recognize the difference between the PTC and these other tax credits. We have an industry that it fluctuates a lot. It relies heavily on investment into this industry, and the PTC is a critical part of that. If we continue to let it expire, we will see the industry drop, we will see job losses, and that it was something that we need to take action on now rather than wait until the expiration has and does it with the comprehensive tax reform that's coming at the end of the year. And so we sent that to the leadership team, asked them to bring that forward for a vote in the House side. Just recently sent another letter to Chairman Camp, who is the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the House of Representatives, and asked him to take action on it as well, that we needed an answer for PTC. We recently had MFG in Aberdeen lay off 92 workers right here in South Dakota because they don't have contracts coming in. They don't have people from the industry placing orders for new turbines, for new orders coming in that they really want to continue to build and put out to create this renewable energy source that's so important to South Dakota. We currently generate 22% of our energy here in South Dakota from wind, and that's something to brag about and something to be proud about, and that's why I pushed so hard to get Chairman Camp to bring it before his committee so that we could vote on it before it does expire at the end of the year.
Well, the production tax credit is extremely important, and the reality is that despite those efforts, nothing has been done. It has not been extended, and as a result, those 92 individuals in Aberdeen lost their jobs. This is an industry that has such potential for South Dakota, both on the manufacturing side, also in terms of training young people who can perform the maintenance on those wind turbines. It provides an extra source of revenue to farmers and others who host the turbines on their land. And it helps us to provide energy so we all can turn the light on and have it work. So it's essential that we do renew this tax credit on a long-term basis. But when you heard this terminology about we can't pick winners and losers, that's exactly the terminology that opponents of this tax credit use to say, hey, we can't give special help to the wind industry. Well, I say we should absolutely choose our energy future. We should pick wind as a winner, and we should extend that tax credit. Now, my opponent says that she supports it. And yet, even though she's in the House leadership, even though she is in Washington, even though she has special access to the Speaker of the House, since she is part of the leadership team, the results, once again, speak for themselves. And it hasn't been extended. And as a result, people are losing their jobs. We need to elect members of Congress who are willing to stand up for the right industries, like those that benefit South Dakota, and who are willing to work together to actually get results, instead of saying that they're on the right side of it but not producing.
You know, I support an American energy plan, and so we need to continue to support all energy that we can propose and support here in America. So wind, ethanol, biodiesel. And in speaking to a lot of the people that are involved in the wind industry, they certainly recognize that they need a plan going forward. I signed on to a bill earlier this year that renewed the PTC for 4 years, knowing that that was the certainty that this industry needed to stand on their feet and to get a firmer foundation going forward, and have been working towards getting that legislation done. My job is to go there and be an advocate for South Dakota and to convince as many people as I possibly can about what's important. And all of the above American energy supply is something that people truly recognize has a lot of validity to it and what I'm going to continue to work for. Wind energy is critical. It's a critical component that we have and need going forward. And so that's why I think when you combine it with other energy supplies that we have in the United States, it's important that we get it going and give it the support it needs at the beginning.
On that point of being an advocate for South Dakotans, we've got this question at least 4 or 5 times already this morning. South Dakota, a large Native American population. I think we're starting with you, Matt. Some folks have asked, as a Native American, what can they expect from you, and why should they vote for you? Because again, I'm paraphrasing a couple of different questions here, but they claim things have been promised before and working with them, and they don't feel that has been.
Yeah. Well, we need a member of Congress who works aggressively and shows up on behalf of all South Dakotans, including our Native Americans. And I'm proud that in my time with Senator Johnson, working on economic development, I spent a lot of time in Indian country, working on things like finding resources for infrastructure, helping small businesses get started so that we can grow the private sector and grow the middle class in Indian country, supporting things like investing in tribal colleges. So we train people who can find good jobs and also create good jobs. One issue that's really been a hot topic in this campaign, rightly so, is the Violence Against Women Act. This was first passed in 1994 to protect victims of violence. Over time, when it's reauthorized, additional parts are added to reflect where we're not doing as well as we need to. One area we haven't done as well as we need to is in protecting Native American women who are victims of violence. This legislation passed with those additional protections through the Senate with the support of Republicans and Democrats. When it got to the House, though, it became a partisan issue. And my opponent opposed the Native American provisions, which I think is very disappointing given that she represents a state with a significant Native American population. I support those provisions. I support reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act in general, but it's another example of something that hasn't gotten done because of the my way or the highway attitude in the House.
You know, I'm not certain what Matt's referring to in the Violence Against Women Act, because we added a provision on the House side that actually allowed Native American women to petition a federal court for restraining orders, which they haven't been able to do in the past. And federal court restraining orders are much more powerful and restrictive than what is generally available to them in tribal court. So I think that was a real win for Native American women and something that we worked hard to make sure was included in our bill. There's a couple of other provisions that I fought for that was especially good for our tribes here in South Dakota. And one of those would be getting an Office of Tribal Relations established within USDA. As I've traveled and visited with a lot of our chairmen here in South Dakota that have been involved in agriculture before, they've said, listen, there's a lot of ag programs out there that other farmers are getting the chance to utilize. We don't have the conversations and we don't have the knowledge to have full access to those like everyone else in South Dakota. And so the Office of Tribal Relations was added at my request to the House Ag Bill. No additional funds will be spent putting it there. The USDA will establish this to make sure that those communications are going to be open with our tribes so that they have equal access to programs within USDA and rural development, making sure going forward that it's available for Native Americans here in South Dakota and across the country. Another bill that I carried that was extremely important for our tribes here in South Dakota was one that protected their tribal sovereignty when it came to the National Labor Relations Board. National Labor Relations Board has come forward and said that they have jurisdiction in some areas over tribal businesses. And when they say that, what they're saying is that they trump the government that tribe has established and rightly has on the basis of their sovereignty. I carried a bill that said they no longer had jurisdiction in these areas and that tribes could maintain their sovereignty over their businesses and not have to live in fear of the National Labor Relations Board coming in and regulating them and forcing them to run their businesses differently than how they know how to for their people. So those are just a few key issues that I've had options to and time to work with our tribes on and carry forward those concerns that they had, and I'll continue to do that on every issue.
Congresswoman, I think it's pretty disingenuous to say you don't know what I'm talking about with respect to the Violence Against Women Act provisions, because you were subject to a whole lot of criticism when it came out that you opposed those provisions, and the one that you said you did support was in answer to those criticisms. So to say that you don't know what I'm talking about is hard to understand. In the Senate, there was bipartisan support for these aggressive provisions. The ones that you support are inadequate. And beyond that, on the issue of how we approach the budget, part of what we need in Indian country is investments in infrastructure, law enforcement, so that a private sector can thrive. But when you support tax cuts to millionaires and slashing all sorts of investments in those things that help the private sector thrive, it's all that much harder to make progress in Indian country.
I'd like to actually follow up on this topic because it's vital for this state. The list is long of Republican and Democratic politicians who have showed up on the reservation making promises over generations. Republicans and Democrats, presidents, the list is long. I want to get down to it, and I want to talk about what plans. I think, Christy, this goes to you first. Is that correct?
Sure.
We have record levels of suicides on our reservations. We have inadequate job opportunities. We have underfunded Indian health services. We have continuing issues with BIA, law enforcement on the reservations. What specific plans do you have that are geared toward resolving the problems on South Dakota's reservations going forward?
Yeah, there are a lot of issues going forward, from unemployment to economic development.
And I want to be specific, not necessarily money.
Yeah.
But I mean, what efforts are you going to make if you're elected over the next 2 years to deal with the issues that we have on South Dakota's reservations?
Well, specifically, when you look at, though, the funding that comes in and impacts our tribes, a lot of them are underfunded. From what they were promised from the federal government is underfunded. So that is a criticism that I have, is that in the past, it's not all about funding, but it is specifically that we haven't followed through on our commitment to our tribes in many areas. When it comes to health services, education, other areas, they just have more challenges than they should have when it comes to federal government funding. Now, you asked for specifics, and one of them, when you look at putting people to work in Indian country and when creating jobs, you can't do that unless you have infrastructure available. And we've got 2 water projects that need to be done that are critically important to our reservations. The Minnewaska water system, which currently looks like as though we have a solution on the table. We've had many meetings about this, and it looks as though USDA and Rural Development will be coming forward with funding, and that will be a project that can be completed. But also, we have the Minnewachuny water system, which needs to come forward. And we need to make within this administration, when they look at funding different projects going forward, that they do that on the basis of people served. That clean drinking water systems get more priority over other systems that have to do with environmental impact. That we look at how many people will be served. And then if it's an authorized project going forward, we talked a little bit earlier about Lewis and Clark, but that's another one that would be impacted by how we prioritize funding when it is given out through different departments and the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Interior to complete projects that are very important to Indian country.
Matt, before you answer, I think your microphone has slipped down. I apologize, but
There you go. Yeah, nicely done. Really the same question, but with a twist to you. What will you commit to going forward, if elected over the next 2 years, to specifically address issues in Indian country?
And you began by mentioning that many politicians have made promises in the past, and often we hear the criticism, too, that they only come around at election time. And I'm very sensitive to that. And I'm proud of the fact that in my time working with Senator Tom Daschle and with Senator Tim Johnson, I spent a lot of time in Indian country working with leaders there on these issues. In my campaign, I've also spent a lot of time talking to tribal leaders, going to powwows, visiting the communities. And I'm proud to say that I just recently received the endorsement of the Great Plains Tribal Chairmen's Association, which I think says a lot. Now, I agree with my opponent that part of the answer here is that we need to make investments in infrastructure and law enforcement. It's fine to say that, though, but if you look at her record, in Washington, she votes for budgets that would slash those very same investments. And so to the extent that that's a solution, you're not part of the solution. In my experience working with Senator Johnson, for example, we got to do things like help the Lakota Fund in Pine Ridge assist small business owners with partly funding for loans, but also lots of assistance in terms of helping business owners have the skills that they need to do marketing, to do accounting, and to make those businesses a success. If we also then have the roads and the infrastructure and the water projects, then those things can blossom, and pretty soon you'll have effective businesses that don't need further help, and that's how it ought to work, and that's the kind of approach I would try to replicate as our next member.
Christy?
Yeah, we've got to make sure that we're there and that we've got the tribal governments weighing in on these issues. They know best how to give input and to really support and create economic development on our reservations and in Indian country. And so that's the conversations that we've been busy having with them and making sure that we're working on issues and areas that they care about and that are priorities for them. And we've been very successful in doing that.
Matt, what should Congress be doing to try to stimulate the economy?
I think the biggest thing we could do would be to resolve certainty on many of these unfinished items that are hanging over the economy. The biggest one of them is the budgetary situation. And that's, again, where my opponent and I have such a big difference. You can ask folks across the political spectrum, and they will tell you that we need a balanced approach to balancing our budget. We need to cut spending where we can, such as ending direct payments, for example, in the Farm Bill. But we also need to look at the revenue side of the equation. We simply cannot afford to make the problem worse by extending the Bush tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires and even giving them new tax breaks on top of that. But because some people have taken a pledge to this Grover Norquist, he wields great power, I think members of Congress should be answering their constituents and not to this Grover Norquist guy. Well, because of so many commitments to this Grover Norquist person, people aren't willing to negotiate, people aren't willing to reach a compromise that includes cuts and changes to the tax code. But if we did that, if we reached a grand bargain on the budget, that would give huge confidence to investors, to consumers, to restore confidence that we can actually tackle the big problems facing this country. Likewise on the Farm Bill, that is a jobs bill for rural South Dakota. But because of the fact that in the House in particular, we haven't been able to reach that bipartisan compromise that we saw in the Senate, well, we've got farmers and ranchers wondering what kind of safety net will be in place for them. That's harming their economic prospects in the here and now. You had members of Congress walk away from the Farm Bill and decide we're not even going to extend it for a short period of time. We're just going to let it expire because we got to get home and campaign for re-election. That is very frustrating. I think it's a slap in the face to our producers, and that's why we need members of Congress who are willing to work hard to reach those solutions instead of just sticking to our ideologies.
Christy?
Well, I think what Matt's talking about is that he prefers to raise tax rates. And for me, that's just not an option at this point in time. I don't think that's how you stimulate economic growth. My commitment is to South Dakotans and what South Dakotans need in order to be successful and to continue the American dream for their kids. And so for me, what I believe needs to happen is that we need to have a competitive tax rate. Right now, we have the highest corporate income tax rate in the world. That is going to drive businesses overseas. It's not going to encourage people to come here to plant a business and to put people to work. And so I've supported a plan that has made it a competitive corporate income tax rate, consolidated our tax rates down to 10% and 25% for the higher level, gotten rid of loopholes and exemptions. I don't think that we have a taxing problem. I don't think the government doesn't take enough of people's money. I think it has a spending problem. And yes, we've got some people that need to pay more and some people that need to pay less. And we've got many people that are wealthy that don't pay enough. We need it to be fair. We need it to be a flat system. We need it to be a system where people can go forward and know that there isn't someone who's worked out a special deal that's gotten an exemption where there shouldn't be. So that's what I've supported and what I voted for. When we talk about the economic crisis that we have in this country, the House has passed a budget the 2 years that I've been there. We put forward a blueprint. The Senate hasn't passed one for 3 years. The President put forward a budget, but not a single person in the Senate or the House voted for it because of the debt that it continued to accumulate on this country. We really do need to have leadership right now and people who are willing to not just talk about the challenges, but to put solutions on the table. And that's what I've done since I've been there, recognizing that we have to get people back to work in this country and that we've had 43 straight months of unemployment over 8%, and it's not sustainable into the future.
I think we also need people who are willing to talk straight about these issues. Now, in the previous question, you said you're mad at the federal government because they're underfunding priorities in Indian country. And then you just told us we have a spending problem and that we should give new tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. Those two answers don't go together. If you want to give new tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires, that makes the deficit problem bigger. And the fact that you have taken this pledge to Grover Norquist means you're not willing to negotiate and actually reach a deal. And so that's why we get this impasse. I definitely want to keep taxes low for the vast majority of middle-class South Dakotans and lower-income South Dakotans because we need to strengthen their pocketbooks in order to get this economy growing again. But I don't think we can afford to defend at all costs tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires because when you do, that means you've got to do things like cutting Pell Grants, which you voted to do, and privatizing Medicare, which is harmful to South Dakotans. I'm on the side of regular folks, and you're siding with Grover Norquist.
Yes, that's it, Matt.
On this topic a little bit here, we do have a question now asking, it said, heard you both speak about the importance of government. This is on top of what we've just been talking about. Importance of government spending such as farming, wind energy, etc. But what specifically in South Dakota would you be in favor of cutting? If there are cuts that need to be made, what in South Dakota are you in favor of cutting? And I honestly forget where we started. So.
Well,
I think I got the rebuttal there, so it's probably your turn to start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, specifically, I mean, if you want to talk about what just happened recently, within the Farm Bill, there was quite a few cuts. There was $16 billion worth of cuts on the commodity title and $16 billion worth of cuts that came from the nutrition side, which was basically reforms to the food stamps program. So the way that would translate into South Dakota would be in the House Ag Bill, we eliminated direct payments that typically go out to producers and always have under current Farm Bill programs. We strengthened crop insurance, recognizing that producers wanted to manage their risk and that was a compelling and important part that we needed to make sure was still going to be around for them. What bothered me about the Senate bill, which Matt has supported, is that it tied crop insurance to conservation compliance. And if you talk to producers all over the state, they're generally not in favor of that. Overwhelmingly, the commodity groups don't favor tying crop insurance to conservation going forward because it starts us down a path that they worry could lead us to making decisions for the wrong reasons. But within that, we also have added some different provisions in there for fighting the pine beetles out in the U.S. Forest Service land, for making sure that we were addressing.
But those aren't cuts.
Well, if you look at specific cuts, those reforms added up to $16 billion worth of cuts. And those were going to be areas where we strengthened what was priorities for South Dakota producers, but then also made sure that we were reforming the program to make sure that it was accountable to the hardworking taxpayers as well.
Well, I do favor the Senate version of the Farm Bill because it strikes a good balance between making some serious cuts but also preserving a strong safety net. The best thing about the Senate version of the Farm Bill is that it passed. All the things you talked about in the House version of the bill, they don't amount to anything because you and the rest of the House leadership did not bring it up for a vote, and you walked away to come home and campaign without getting that done on behalf of farmers and ranchers. But we certainly should end direct payments and make those savings where we can. In addition, something else that I think we can do without is tax breaks for big oil companies like ExxonMobil and the other companies that benefit handsomely when you and I all pay high gas prices at the gas pump. Those are some of the biggest, most profitable corporate entities ever to exist on the face of this earth, and they certainly don't need additional help from the taxpayer beyond what they're getting at the gas pump. Yet my opponent has twice had opportunities to vote on whether to keep those tax breaks to big oil companies, and she has sided with the oil companies. Well, I'll side with South Dakotans. And it's also troubling then when you take significant campaign contributions from the likes of ExxonMobil PAC and Halliburton PAC and other big oil companies. We need members of Congress who are willing to stand up to those big oil companies when necessary, including ending their tax breaks so we can help to tackle the deficit.
Well, you know, anybody who says that I haven't worked hard to pass the Farm Bill is just playing political games, because everybody knows all of the different avenues that I pursued to get that done. And that it is, I've lived my whole life in agriculture in South Dakota and certainly realized the safety net that a Farm Bill provides to us and for our national security in keeping a cost, an affordable cost and a safe food supply here in this country. So that's not a true statement when you attack me for not trying to get it done, because I've done everything I possibly can to get that Farm Bill accomplished. I'm not going to drive up gas prices for consumers in a recession. I'm just not going to put them on the table and force them to pay more right now. I'm going to support provisions that make sure that everybody, it doesn't get exemptions and loopholes going forward. And we're going to address that in comprehensive tax reform.
Thank you.
A quick question from a reader, if you, I guess it was a reader. Matt, would you vote to ban assault rifles?
No.
Well, that was easy.
No.
Any rebuttal?
Well, that was.
How about this? Why?
Why?
Why not, I guess, is the correct question there.
Well, I have great respect for the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. I enjoy shooting trap and occasionally hunting, and that's part of our tradition in South Dakota, and I don't have any intention of messing with that tradition.
We might agree on this one. This is,
Yeah,
you guys
we better
should start
write this
writing
down.
notes on this. We're going to agree on this one. No, I feel exactly the same way, that the hunting heritage and is very important to my family, and I truly cherish our Second Amendment rights as well.
Good juggling there, Medicare. Christy, we're to you here. You've made Matt's, in some of your campaign work history, something of an issue in the campaign, particularly as it relates to his work in the environmental area. Why is working on environmental concerns a bad thing for South Dakota's representative?
Well, working on it and advocating for it is something that would be detrimental to South Dakota's economy is a serious issue. When you look at what cap and trade would have done to South Dakota specifically, it would devastate us. The PUC, the South Dakota Public Utilities Commission, came out with a study that said that if cap and trade were put into place, it would raise utility costs for the average South Dakota family by $1,500 per family a year. That it would cut farm profits in half within the next 20 to 30 years. That would be very devastating for South Dakota, and that's why I don't support putting a national energy tax in place, trying to control carbon emissions by letting the government decide how much energy that you can use, and then if you go over that, taxing you for it. I think it's wrong. And when you look at Matt's history and the amount of years that he dedicated to studying global warming and methods that could be used to control carbon emissions, and how he's traveled around the country at United Nations conferences and to Africa talking about global warming and mechanisms to control these kind of emissions, I think it's very clear that these kind of policies would devastate South Dakota, and it's important information for South Dakotans to hear about.
Matt?
Yes, my opponent has called me a radical environmentalist, and my wife points out that I do recycle my beer cans, for whatever that's worth. But I have not advocated for the policy you're talking about, and if you want to know whether I support it, you can ask me, and the answer is no, I don't support it. I'd like to ask you which item that I've written on in the past gives you the impression that I support it. What passage? Can you cite one of them? Because there's a reporter in this room who has read my writings on this topic and said that I was an analyst, just the way I've been describing it throughout. When you've got an incumbent who attacks her challenger right out of the gate like this at the beginning of a political campaign, it's clear that the incumbent doesn't want to talk about their own record of accomplishment, because that record is very limited. But when we look at energy issues, if you want to look at something in the here and now, not stuff from 10 years ago, but in the here and now, we can look at those votes to protect big oil companies. On the issue of climate change, I believe that it's real, and I believe that we should take measures to attack the problem in ways that grow our economy at the same time. You have said that you don't even believe that the science is real, you don't believe climate change exists. When you were in the state legislature, you voted for a resolution that said climate change is caused by a variety of factors, including thermological ones, meteorological ones, and astrological ones. So you somehow think that the fact that I'm a Taurus has something to do with the climate system? That's a pretty wild belief, and I think it calls into doubt your credibility on this issue.
I would ask that you direct your comments, please, to the panel here. But, Christy.
Well, in response to that, I would just say that we will certainly get those documents to you, that I feel you were clear that you were advocating for the issues. But beyond that, certainly, I would never spend 10 years of my life working on something that I don't believe in. Either Matt is not telling the truth on this issue, or he lacks conviction. And that's the concern that I have on this cap and trade, cap and tax issue going forward. We truly do need to make sure that we see what people's backgrounds are, that we talk about the clear differences between opponents and myself, and that the South Dakotans have as much information that they possibly can have to make a decision when it comes to Election Day.
I mean, I'm going to go out of order here, because it sounds to me like you're saying, Christy, that you don't believe in global warming. Is that correct?
No, I don't believe that there's consensus coming on that human activity leads to the sole reason for global warming. It's clear that we have changes in our climate, but there is no consensus on how that it really interacts with human activity, if it's solely related to that, or that these type of mechanisms put into place, like a cap and tax scheme, would be the right way to go about it. When we look at policies, we have to look at a cost-benefit balance. I don't believe it's right that we devastate our economy to do something that we see is already happening through the free market system. Our emissions are the lowest that they've been since 1997. So without the Kyoto Protocol, without cap and trade, we've already seen our carbon emissions drop. We're going that direction. And to put in a scheme such as this, which would take more money out of people's pockets, I don't think is the right answer.
Thank you. I apologize for breaking the rules there. I'd like to start, Matt, with you, and the question is this. The President has called for the repeal of the Defense of Marriage Act, which provides that states that outlaw gay marriage do not have to recognize such unions performed in states that allow it. What is your stand on that issue?
And we discussed that issue right at this very table back in the primary. And I've said that I support the idea of civil unions because I believe everyone deserves to be treated the same, and I believe South Dakotans feel that way too, that whether it's the issue of taxation or being able to visit a sick partner in the hospital or having access to health care benefits, everyone deserves to be treated the same, and civil unions would provide that in a legal sense, but we should leave the term marriage to states and churches to define for themselves.
So you support or do not support the President's call for the repeal of the Defense of Marriage Act?
Well, in the sense that it defines marriage at the federal level, I think we should leave that to states and churches, and so I don't support defining it at the federal level.
Christy?
I believe in protecting the sanctity of marriage, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and anything that I would vote for or support would reflect that.
Marriage and guns. I think
Black helicopter's next.
I forget where we're at.
we're back at Christie.
Okay.
Okay, Christy, you know, I think if anybody has watched this already, they get a sense of the theme of this question I'm going to ask you. Why, I want you to explain to South Dakota voters why they should care about this election. Here we are in a completely gridlocked congressional situation, and we in South Dakota have one voice. So why do I care who is elected as our one voice in Congress?
Well, for the first time in history, we're in danger of not passing on the American dream to our kids. I mean, when I sit down with people and ask them who believes they're better off than their parents are, most of the people in the room can raise their hand. But if you ask them if they believe their children will be better off, very few hands go up. And that's because they recognize the debt that we're facing, that regulations are at an all-time high, and major regulations that are coming out and costing small businesses and schools and local governments more and more money trying to comply with it where they're not able to serve people. And so people need to care about this election because they're going to want somebody who's proven themselves, that's proven themselves to put solutions on the table and take feedback from people on those and go forward and fight for what's important to the state. I've done that. I've worked hard to make sure that we passed a budget and that we tightened our belt, that we recognize the situation that we are in. One of the bills that I supported was cut cap and balance. It promoted a balanced budget amendment that said our federal government should have to have a balanced budget, much like the South Dakota legislature does every year. It cut our spending, but it also capped future spending to make sure it put us on the path towards being much more responsible. I've worked in the Education Committee to try to consolidate programs to give local school districts more freedom and to not tie their hands on how they use federal government funds, but to let them use it to best serve our kids closer to home. They make much better decisions for our kids than a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. And on the ag bill, it reflects that as well, that taxpayers, we need to be accountable to that. Get a safety net there, but also recognize that we can't continue things like direct payments going forward when they're highly criticized and they're not necessary. So those things are, people need to see that there's solutions out there and someone who's advocated and supported those to get them put in place.
Matt, why should people care?
Well, if we look at the results since the last election, people have only gotten more frustrated and our problems have only gotten bigger. And if people want more of the same, maybe they should stick with the folks who are in office now. But if they are frustrated, as I am, and still believe that we can do better, then we need to make a change. We need to elect someone who is on the side of middle-class South Dakotans, for example, and wants to protect Medicare, instead of voting for this plan to privatize it, which would put a burden on South Dakota seniors in order to protect tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. That's one key difference between us. I think people are tired of the my way or the highway attitude that is leading to so much gridlock in Washington. It's why we haven't tackled postal reform. It's why we haven't reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act, or the Production Tax Credit, or the Farm Bill. People are frustrated with that, and they want leaders who are focused on results and who are willing to work together, not those who take part in this my way or the highway attitude as part of the Tea Party that my opponent is affiliated with. And finally, people deserve to have a hard-working member of Congress who they can trust to show up, even when the cameras aren't rolling, but who will be there and aggressively advocating for South Dakota seniors and small businesses and young people across South Dakota. It's your newspaper, of course, that broke the story about the fact that my opponent only went to 4 out of 20 of her first Ag Committee meetings. In a time when we are facing a record drought, in a time when the Farm Bill is about to expire, we should expect our member of Congress to be there fighting for us. I'm running to bring back the bipartisan tradition where our member is an aggressive person who fills that spot on the committee and speaks up aggressively for us.
Christie.
Well, we've proven that the numbers that Matt just used are wrong, and we've given him those numbers and shown that times I was in that committee when they weren't counted, that I was in other committees voting, and times every morning I wake up and decide where the most important place is that I can be and where effective I can be for South Dakota people. And that's what I've done. I serve on 3 committees and 9 subcommittees, and it's important that we have someone on those committees working for the best interests of South Dakota. So going forward, we have a lot of challenges in front of us. The fact that I've sat there and taken votes to rein in our spending, that we've actually enacted $2.2 trillion worth of spending cuts, puts us on a better path, recognizing that we're not going to continue to accumulate debt.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, before Randall gets to our last question, I just want to let you guys know that we have got myriad questions that there's no way we're going to be able to get to in the format and time. And I wanted to thank the readers and apologize for those that we didn't get to verbalize, but offer up to either of you, if you'd like to stay afterward and type in answers, you certainly can. But I think Randall has our last question.
Yeah, and we're, in the interest of time, we recognize it's valuable. One more question. Matt, and I think it goes to you first. How much will your campaign cost? And the second part of that is, will most of your funds come from outside or inside South Dakota?
My campaign will, by necessity, cost a lot less than my opponents because as an incumbent who's in Washington.
I'm asking, but how much will that be?
Well, somewhere around $1 million. And we have worked hard at raising money because that is part of the competition that we're in here, to be able to travel the state in my vehicle, to be able to communicate over the airwaves. And I'm proud of the outpouring of support we've had on a bipartisan basis and from South Dakotans in particular. Very little of my money has come from the big, powerful interests that are funding my opponent's campaign. I haven't taken a penny from Big Oil, for example, whereas my opponent has taken something like $70,000 from those companies. She will, of course, have much more money. She'll be able to send much more of that mail there and run TV ads. But I'm proud that we are actually winning in one category of fundraising, and that is small contributions from South Dakotans.
So
And
will
I think
most
that's
of
a
your
great
money come from inside or outside South Dakota?
Certainly from inside, and as I said, I'm proud that we're winning in the category of small contributions from South Dakotans. That's regular folks, and that's whose side we should be on, and that's whose side I will be on as your next member of Congress.
Thank you, Matt. Christy, same question.
Most of our money will come from inside of South Dakota. We'll have, most of it will be from individual donors. We've worked hard to maintain our grassroots organization and communicate with people what we've been working for. You know, I know Matt keeps referring to my friends in Big Oil, but I wish somebody would tell Big Oil because they're currently, have friends of theirs that are running ads against me in South Dakota for supporting renewable energy. So that just doesn't hold water, a claim like that. We're proud of our campaign. We're proud of what we've been able to put together for resources, and we're going to spend them wisely.
And how much will that be?
You know, our budget right now is somewhere between $1.5 to $2 million, and we will adjust it accordingly to make sure that we're being thrifty with it.
On behalf of the editorial board, and more importantly on behalf of the voters of the state, we want to thank you for your time and thank you for your commitment to run. It's a difficult job, as well as serving. So thank you, and good luck to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.